What's up, everybody? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel, and then follow me on social media on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter so you guys don't miss any of our content over the course of this season. All right, let's talk some basketball. All right, let's get into our season preview for the Minnesota Timberwolves. So, they lost Kyle Anderson, Jordan McLaughlin, Monty Morris, and Karl-Anthony Towns. They added Rob Dillingham, who's a scoring guard that they got with the 8th overall pick, Joe Ingles, Donte DiVincenzo, and Julius Randle as the returns in the Karl-Anthony Towns trade. I also found out that Keita Bates-Diop is coming over as well, a guy that I'm not sure will play that much, but he does play at the forward position, which is probably the area that they're least deep. So there's some value there, but I'm not sure how much of an NBA rotation player he is. Let's take a look at the Cat trade real quick. So as I talked about a little bit on the Monday show, I understand why they did it. Julius Randle has a player option after this year for $31 million that he will most likely decline and try to work out some sort of long-term deal, a new deal, right? Karl-Anthony Towns has a $61 million player option in 2027 that he will almost certainly pick up. So Cat's contract is 3 additional years longer and almost twice as expensive. That is just really difficult to deal with financially, right? Donte DiVincenzo at $12 million a year is just a more manageable salary as well to work with. So there's substantially more financial flexibility in the next few years after this deal. Let's look at the payroll real quick. Even without Karl-Anthony Towns, if Gobert picks up his player option, that's $47 million on the books next year. If he doesn't pick up the player option and you re-sign him, judging by what Jared Allen got this summer and what Isaiah Hartenstein got this summer, Isaiah Hartenstein got almost $30 million. Jared Allen got more than $30 million. Rudy Gobert, even I personally would rather have Jared Allen as my center than Rudy Gobert, but because he's just more functional as an offensive piece. But like Rudy Gobert, in terms of reputation, is considered by many to be a better player than both of those guys. So you're looking at like $35 million to $40 million a year in some sort of 4-year deal for Rudy Gobert after this season. So like that's expensive. Anthony Edwards makes $46 million next year. Jaden McDaniels makes $25 million next year. Mike Conley is on the books for $10 million next year. Naz Reid is due a new deal. So it was a sacrifice. You sacrificed a chance to run it back with a Western Conference Finals team and a young superstar that will improve year over year for long-term flexibility. I personally don't like the Julius Randle fit. We'll go into more detail about that later. But most star trades don't bring back a star. So to get real long-term flexibility comparatively to your other situation, also have the potential upside. Again, I don't like the fit, but there's potential upside because he's a star of Julius Randle. And then depth with Donte DiVincenzo. If there was some sort of directive from ownership to shed money, get out of the second apron, build long-term flexibility, if that was a directive from ownership, this is about as good as you can do because you got a star back, you got a depth piece back, and you built in that flexibility. So even if we don't necessarily like the fit of the star, if you were in the same position where you were asked to trade a star for financial flexibility, it's difficult to do much better than Tim Connolly did, right? So now from that perspective, let's look at the basketball. So Julius Randle, the upside is what he can do on the ball. And I told you guys, I promised I'd get into more detail in the season preview. So let's talk a little bit about some of these specifics with Julius Randle on the ball. The last time Julius Randle was healthy for a whole season was 2023. He played 77 games. He averaged 25 points, 10 rebounds, and 4 assists on 58% true shooting, which is obviously very good. He made the All-Star team, and he was third-team All-NBA. He was also an efficient, high-volume shot creator. Over a point per possession on pick and rolls, ISOs, and post-ups, including passes. To give you an example of the difference in volume and efficiency, Karl-Anthony Towns ran 524 pick and rolls, ISOs, and post-ups last year for 513 points, including passes. That's just 0.98 points per possession. Julius Randle, in that 2023 season, ran 996 pick and rolls, ISOs, and post-ups, including passes, got 1,038 points, which is 1.04 points per possession. So Julius in his last healthy season, basically did twice the volume of shot creation that Cat did last year and was considerably more efficient. So, like, Julius is just a much better on-ball shot creator than Karl-Anthony Towns is. He's a deadly face-up player. On, like, face-up jab step jump shots, he got over a point per possession. He shot 64% at the rim. He shot 56% on floaters and hooks. He's got like a really efficient little left shoulder fade when he's posting up on that left block and he kind of gets into the middle of the floor. And that specific type of on-ball shot creation beyond Ant is something that Minnesota didn't have last year. And it's a big part of why they struggled offensively. If you look at the numbers, when Ant was on the floor, the Timberwolves had a 118 offensive rating. That's very good. It's not elite. It's not like the best teams in the league, but it's very good. When Ant was off the floor, they had a 111.4 offensive rating. That's very bad. So improved secondary shot creator, an improved secondary shot creator like Julius Randle will, one, give you a better chance of scoring when Ant's off the floor, and will, two, when Ant is off the ball, give you a better opportunity to create quality shots. So, like, I think Julius, too, in two-man game, like, he's not going to be the pick and pop player that Cat was, but when they face any sort of switching, Julius is a better matchup attacker in terms of using his size to bully smaller defenders. I like that fit in terms of Julius as an on-ball creator. The downside of this particular fit is when Ant has the ball. Last year, even with Cat in the lineup, the Wolves struggled to space the floor for Ant. Jaden McDaniels converted spot-up possessions at just 0.99 points per possession. Teams were comfortable helping off of Jaden and just throwing a late closeout at him. Rudy Gobert, as I've said so many times on the show, everyone talks about him on the defensive end of the floor and low lights of him getting scored on in isolation. That's not the issue with Rudy. I still think he's an awesome defensive player. The issue with Rudy is he basically has to be completely open to finish around the basket. Anything that's in traffic, he's so bad at catching and finishing surrounded by bodies in the middle of the floor. That's the real reason Rudy deserves criticism. That's the real reason that France benched him with the Olympics. That's the real reason why at stretches it seems like, oh man, like this doesn't work offensively with Rudy on the floor. It comes down to him being able to catch and finish in traffic. And so with Jaden, Cat, and Rudy, it already was kind of janky. Now you're subbing out Cat for Julius Randle, and he's just not a good off-ball player on the offensive end of the floor. His spot-up efficiency has been way below average basically every season of his career. He did peak in the 2023 season at 1.07 points per possession, which is slightly above average, but he dipped right back down to the 33rd percentile last year, just 0.93 points per possession. And in all of the previous seasons, he was well below a point per possession. So he's not a good spot-up guy. He's basically a 1 point per possession catch and shoot guy. He shoots about 38% when he's unguarded on jump shots, but he shoots poorly when he's guarded. He scores on a cut maybe once every 2 games. He's in the 25th percentile for frequency, so he's never been a high volume cutter. He did some pick and popping with Brunson. He had a decent pick and pop season in 2023, but it wasn't as effective last year. So, like, there's some issues there with how you can make use of Julius Randle off the ball. It's not going to be easy for Anthony Edwards. His development as a pull-up shooter, which really came to the surface in the postseason last year, that's going to be huge for this team's potential. And hopefully that translates forward into this season. But again, like, that fits specifically having Jaden, Julius, and Rudy all on the floor at the same time. That could be an absolute disaster for spacing. And so I'm a little bit concerned about that. Health is also an issue for Julius. He's a rhythm player, so when he gets out of the lineup for a while, it takes some time to get back to form. In addition to missing a bunch of time this year, if you go back to the previous year, he missed some time right before the playoffs, and then when he came back, he just didn't look like Julius Randle. He looked really bad. But then at the same time, I don't really view that as a factor in this trade because Karl-Anthony Towns has a lot of the same health question marks that Julius Randle did. Donte DiVincenzo, I think he's just a rock-solid starting NBA guard. And he may not even start on this particular team. He's a very good athlete at the guard position. He's 6'4", he's strong, he runs and jumps well. He's a very good on-ball defender. He's got a great motor. He always plays hard. He gets good physical ball pressure on the ball handler. And then he turned into one of the best shooters in the league. He shot over 40% on 9 3-point attempts per game last year. He was one of only 3 players in the entire NBA to attempt at least 8 threes per game and to hit at least 40% of them. Him, Steph Curry, and CJ McCollum. He converted spot-up possessions at 1.23 points per possession. 37 players in the NBA logged at least 300 spot-up possessions. Donte ranked 4th on that list. He's just a very, very good offensive off-ball guard. He's an absolute gamer, plays both ends of the floor, plays hard, leverages athletic gifts. I think Wolves fans are going to love him. I think he's a better player than Nickeil Alexander-Walker, for instance. Like, I think that's a legitimate upgrade. So, in summary, looking at the trade, very rarely can you trade a star and get a star back while also getting a legit depth piece and get the financial flexibility. Like, if you are under this directive, it's about as good as you can do. My concerns about this trade mostly center around fit. Again, Cat is a much better offensive fit with Anthony Edwards off the ball, but there is upside to the Randle fit with his on-ball creation, right? And you add that starting two-way caliber guard in starting caliber two-way guard in Donte DiVincenzo, right? So, like, it's about as I would have preferred if the Timberwolves ran it back, because you got a really bad matchup in the conference finals. Anthony Edwards is ascending. You've got this beautiful front court to fight against the Nikola Jokic problem. I would have preferred if they run it back, and I'm sure some Wolves fans feel the same. But I understand why they did it, and they did about as good a job of doing it as you could do under that type of directive. Let's talk about Ant's development, because this is a huge piece of the Wolves this year. The postseason leap last year was real. He entered into that like bona fide top tier superstar territory in the playoff run. He averaged 28, 7, and 7 on 60% true shooting, which is insane. Took his team to the Western Conference Finals. Really special stuff, right? What facilitated that rise? It was a combination of jump shooting and playmaking. He took 7 threes a game in the playoffs and made 40% of them. He shot 43% on pull-up jump shots, getting 1.08 points per shot, which is great. Did a really nice job, though, in the playmaking front, driving and kicking to generate advantage opportunities for a season, averaging 6.5 assists per game in a playoff run that's 3 rounds long. That's a legitimate playmaking leap from Anthony Edwards. Now, the question is, how much of that was real? I believe most of it was. But the reality is they're going to need it to be real. Teams are going to consistently pack the paint on him and force him to hit shots over the top of the defense. That's going to be an important counter for him. So that jump shot development, that being real, goes a long way to confronting some of the spacing issues, because this is a clunky fit. It's going to be a challenging season for Ant on the offensive end of the floor. How much is he up to that challenge? Because if he can overcome a lot of that, that's where you can get the upside of Julius Randle when he's on the ball. And I'm not worried about Ant off the ball at all. He's just turned into too good of a shooter at this point. I have one last little kind of like point that I want to hit before we get into more of a big picture summary. The backup forward spot. The Wolves bench got better with the addition of Donte DiVincenzo. You're actually really deep at bench guard, right? Like, you have Nickeil Alexander-Walker, you have Donte DiVincenzo, Rob Dillingham. He's a top 10 pick, so you got to find minutes for him there, right? You actually have 5 guards in the rotation. That's something that I think will be interesting to watch the rest of the season. You have an excellent backup center. Naz Reid's about as good as you can do in the backup center position in the NBA. But with the loss of Kyle Anderson, you're now looking at Joe Ingles, Luka Garza, and Keita Bates-Diop basically as your backup forwards. And none of those are great options, right? So, like, I think the initial setup is fine. I think having Jaden McDaniels, Julius Randle, Rudy Gobert, Naz Reid, I think you got enough there to fill most of the front court minutes. It's more of a depth issue. If one of those 4 guys goes down with injury, that's where you could be looking at 20 plus minutes a night for guys like Joe Ingles, Luka Garza, Keita Bates-Diop. That's where it could get a little bit tricky, right? So there's 2 ways to confront that. One is a balancing trade. Like, you have 5 guards that are all really good rotation players. If you could turn one of them, let's say the worst one, like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, if you could turn him into a forward, that balances things a little bit, right? Another direction they could go is look to build out some 3-guard looks. Donte plays bigger than he is. He rebounds really well for a guard, and he's strong and has a good like center of gravity, so he could slide his feet well. So, like, I think you could like kind of account for the fact that he plays a little bigger than he is. And then Anthony Edwards is one of the most physically imposing guards in the league. So like I actually think an Anthony Edwards, Mike Conley, Donte DiVincenzo lineup with Gobert and one of Julius Randle or Jaden McDaniels could work. So like keep an eye on the backup forward spot, but one of the ways they could confront that outside of a trade is just trying to build out some more 3-guard looks. All right, last segment. Why don't you have Minnesota with the top tier contenders? I have Minnesota in the if things go right tier. I'm a huge Ant fan. I'm rooting for this team to succeed. So this is not about any sort of like personal vendetta. I actually really like Anthony Edwards. I think he might be my favorite player of this next era, right? But they have some gaping holes and specific matchup weaknesses that could get them beat. Specifically, teams that do a really good job of protecting the rim. We saw this in the Dallas series, right? In the Denver series, Anthony Edwards attempted 7.1 restricted area shots per game and shot 74% there. In the Dallas series, he attempted just 5.8 restricted area shots per game and shot just 55% there. So going from a guy who was having a bad rim protection postseason run in Jokic to legit rim protection in Gafford and Lively completely changed Minnesota's ability to get into the basket, specifically with Ant. But it also extended into the regular season. The top 8 opponent points in the paint team, so let's call that rim protection teams. The top 8 rim protection teams, not counting Minnesota in the league, were the Chicago Bulls, the Miami Heat, Cleveland Cavaliers, the New Orleans Pelicans, the New York Knicks, the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Orlando Magic, and the Boston Celtics. The Timberwolves went 10-10 against that group, and they went 46-16 against everyone else. So that's like a pretty substantial sample size that demonstrates that the teams that can really pack the paint and protect the rim are going to bog down this Minnesota offense and cause them to be vulnerable in a real way. So like now we can kind of exacerbate that concept by swapping in Julius Randle for Karl-Anthony Towns. So like that to me is like a legitimate matchup weakness that could get them into some trouble. There are like if they run into teams that can really protect the rim, they could end up getting beat in the playoffs. Teams that I look at there, like if they face Dallas again, I think they'd lose. If they face Oklahoma City, I think they'd lose. Even some of the lower teams in the West, like a team like the Lakers that has Anthony Davis on that front line, that's a team that could really pack the paint against Minnesota and cause some issues for their defense. The Lakers struggle to guard on the perimeter, but they have guys in Minnesota that don't necessarily need to be accounted for on the perimeter that they can stash bad defensive players on. So like, I think that's a significant weakness. The second big weakness that I want to talk about is trapping Ant. This was something we saw towards the tail end of the Denver series and then a lot in the Dallas series. It's a copycat league, right? Denver showed it. Dallas copied it and kind of perfected it with rim protection. Ant got blitzed in ball screens 22 times in the playoffs. The Wolves scored just 10 points on those possessions, and they shot just 3 for 16 from the field. It is a copycat league. Teams will, all of the good coaching staffs in the league, when they're game planning for Minnesota, will watch that footage and go, man, just put 2 on Ant. There's nothing they can do. So what is your game plan for that? I'm a huge believer in their defense. Yes, they struggled in the Luka matchup, but there's really only a small handful of guys in the league that can really make Luka uncomfortable. But there are a lot of ways that this offense can be really bogged down by packing the paint, by trapping Ant in his ball screens, and it could potentially be worse now that Cat is gone. And so, like, that's something that they got to have a game plan for. Whether that's aligning things so that you have a good playmaker as the first read for Ant when he gets into the trap, whether that's just a lot of internal improvement for guys like Jaden McDaniels, whether that's Julius Randle improving as a spot-up player, they've got to find a way to convert those 4-on-3s into easy shots because the book is out with Minnesota. Pack the paint, trap Ant, you can bog down their offense. So in summary, I think this team is built to win regular season games. They've got young, energetic talent. I think they will likely end up in the 3 or the 4 seed this year. But I think they need to catch some matchup luck in order to win 4 playoff rounds. As I mentioned earlier, there are some teams in the Western Conference that I think would just beat them because of their ability to protect the rim. So that puts them in the mix with all of these teams below the top tier for me. I'm not worried about Ant. I think he's ready to do this. I just think the rest of the roster has some holes that are tough to account for.